taking place. It's called desecration of enemy corpses. You know, cutting off hands and taking them for souvenirs and things of that nature.
Isn't that what they did in the Vietnam War?
Yeah.
They blow their teeth.
Yeah, and things like this happen on both sides. And I can tell you this, it happens more frequently in warfare situations where the enemy has been more sufficiently dehumanized. In other words, when institutional racist attitudes have been involved, those things are more likely to have happened. And you know where these things tend not to show up?
In the history books?
Yeah. Because it would make us look bad. Yeah, Shepard.
Okay, as a military child, I grew up in a environment where I was told that in order to get people in the mentality that you're going to war, you're going to have to kill. A certain amount of dehumanization needs to
You have to do it. And I'm not saying, and of course we're not saying it's right, but for practical purposes, yeah, in order, because most of us don't want to kill other people. As a matter of fact, most of us have, sort of have an instinctual desire not to do it. And this is why that instinct has to be trained out of someone. And of course, for some people, it takes a lot more work to make that happen. But yeah, it's, as Mr. Shepard put it, it's an unfortunate practical necessity. Not endorsing it, though. Now, we're running out of time a little bit. I hope I didn't talk too much about this and spoon-feed it too much. I want to talk now for at least 10 minutes about one of the questions that you wrote for homework for last time. It concerns what the author of our text calls moral realism. And by the way, on a quiz or test, well, I guess you already had the quiz, so on something like a test, the word moral realism will show up. But note that it is, this concept is elsewhere often called political realism. Mr. Peters.
On the syllabus, you have the test scheduled for the week of the 25th. Is that still the case?
It will probably be late next week.
Okay.
Yeah, or the following Monday.
Okay.
But yeah, if it would be late that week.
Okay.
Now, the reason I have MMR here, that is simply an acronym for what phrase? Might makes right. Now, how might a proponent of this position argue for it? Hint, the argument is very similar to the way the cultural differences argument works. Observation that those with might it's the observation that no matter where you go in history or present day, those with the might get to determine what is right. That is, they're able to get their way. Or as I sometimes like to put it, the way the golden, not the Knights' golden rule, but the other golden rule. He who has the gold gets to make the rules. Or I guess peace through superior firepower is another one of those bumper sticker lines. If you have enough guns, you can force other people to do whatever you want. So the question is, all this, talk about rightness and so forth. The sophist by the name of Thrasymachus, who's mentioned in your text, calls talk of rightness and wrongness, he calls that high-minded foolishness. That's the phrase that he utters in Plato's dialogue Republic. He says, because no matter where you go in the world, those with the power to get their way, get to call the shots. So this talk of what is truly right and wrong is really a superfluous matter. And people who have an understanding about how to get what they want really shouldn't give a rip about right and wrong. And I want to talk about an important side issue here. How many of you read that little side excerpt in the textbook titled The Ring of Gyges? This is a famous story, ladies and gentlemen. It probably predates Plato by a good bit, but the story shows up in Plato's dialogue Republic. It tells the story of a simple, everyday shepherd who one night when he's doing his duty to king and country, by performing his job, an earthquake occurs. And a huge fissure forms in the earth. And he's extremely afraid, but not so scared that he doesn't make his way down into the chasm. He finds a lot of things in this chasm. One of them is something like a giant wooden horse, which should remind us of what story?
Trojan.
Should remind us of the Trojan horse. Things are often not quite as they seem. He finds a corpse of what he describes as greater than human stature. It's bare naked, and all that the corpse has on it is what? Yeah, it has a ring. So this fellow takes nothing except for the ring. He does take this ring. He discovers its power later on. And this is the fodder for so many stories. This magic ring gives him the power of invisibility, he discovers. He uses this ring his ring to seek his happiness. And by the way, according to this account of happiness, all of us basically want what for ourselves? All of us would like to be able to get whatever we wanted for ourselves. The problem is, as Plato's half-brother Glaucon puts it, is we live in a society. We give our tacit consent to what we later on in political history call a social contract. We do not give up this freedom because we want to. We give it up because we pretty much have to. Because in order to live peaceably among ourselves, we have to follow certain rules, whether we like it or not. Now, this man who finds this ring is able to do what?
Take it whatever you want.
Yeah. He is able to get himself out of the social contract because he won't what? Because he now has the power not to get found out. Now, before I give the last punchline, I'm going to put a phrase on the board that I want you to know. You'll need it. One of the morals of this story is that it articulates a view about human nature that is sometimes called psychological egoism. Psychological egoism is not an ethical theory. Psychological egoism is a descriptive theory of human nature. It contends that by nature, we seek our own self-interest. Psychological egoism says that by nature, we are always seeking our own self-interest. And we do it implicitly and unconsciously. For example, the reason why I follow the rules according to psychological egoism isn't because I'm a good boy. It's because I know that there's something to be gained by playing by the rules. The reason why I do nice things for other people is because I believe it will benefit me, later on, in the long run. Now, according to this account, everybody is pretty much, quote-unquote, selfish by nature. It's just that selfishness oftentimes takes forms that look kind and altruistic. But nobody is truly kind and altruistic. It is merely what we sometimes have to do to get what we want. And I want this to sound just as dark as it's supposed to sound. According to this account of human nature, there is no such thing as love in the way that we normally think of it. Because all so-called love for other people basically reduces to what? Self-love. I did it because I love you. No. You did these things basically because you were trying to get your best interests met. It is a very grim picture of human nature. But some people believe that this grim picture of human nature might be more accurate than we would care to believe. I am not going to pass judgment on that here and now. But this is a view about human nature that is consistent with sophists such as Thrasymachus, who argues that in the end, what we want to do is get what we want. And the person who is more prepared to throw out all the stops to get what they want is more likely to make it happen. This is why being ethical, according to Thrasymachus, in the traditional sense, is for suckers. Being ethical is for suckers. What you want to do is appear to be ethical so you can pull the wool over people's eyes. The only reason why you would want to be ethical is because there's no other way around it. Because ultimately, the more you can grab for yourself, the better off and the happier you will be. This is the reason why the sophists, like Thrasymachus, believed that their craft was such a powerful craft. I'm talking about rhetoric. Because they know that traditional might is really not as effective as what? Yeah. The gift of gab is far more effective in the long run. Because after all, you can kill people with words as effectively as you can with guns. You can subjugate people and talk them into being enslaved to you more effectively with words than if they're looking down a barrel of a gun. Because in fact, if they're looking down a barrel of a gun, they're more likely to fight back. Because they know they're being oppressed. It's if you can convince them that their slavery is freedom, you will have won the day. This is one of those reasons why the text asks that question about politicians. Are politicians sophists? I do kind of want to talk about that question because it's a little bit what?
Cynical.
Yeah. Well, and it's a little bit subtle too. It is quite right that politicians oftentimes take what Protagoras called this. Let me write it on the board. It is practical to use certain kind of skills to win people to your point of view if you're trying to get policy through. And it is also practical to use all of the rhetorical means at your disposal for doing so. This is why if you're going to persuade a bunch of people who perceive you as an outsider to your position, it pays for you to convince them that you're not an outsider to them, but an insider. I'll give you a famous example. And by the way, all politicians do this. But back in the days of William Jefferson Clinton, he was known to have put Grecian formula in his hair when he was going to speak to younger Americans. But he would let his hair go his whitish gray color when he was talking to the AARP crowd. And this is just practical. It's called you want to look like you're one of the people who you're talking with. That's why you want to roll up your sleeves and play Joe the plumber if you're trying to win over traditional blue-collar workers. Remember, it's all about appearances according to this. Because if you give the right appearances, you're more likely to win people over to your side. You don't need a good rational argument. You just need to have the right tricks to getting people over to your side. And it's oftentimes not with logical arguments. As a matter of fact, an illogical argument is sometimes more persuasive to people who don't know logic than an actual logical argument. As a matter of fact, a logical argument might just piss off your audience. I'm not going to listen to that damn egghead. He thinks he's smarter than me. Knowing your audience is half the battle here. Yeah, they understood that the most powerful of might is to learn how to persuade, to learn how to win friends and influence people. Now, here's where the question becomes a subtle one. Are politicians being merely practical, or are they sophists? Now, here's what the author was getting at with that question. A sophist such as Thrasymachus believes what about truth? There really is no truth apart from our perspectives. Now, I would suggest it depends which politicians you're talking about. Because I do believe that there are some politicians that really don't believe in truth at all. That really all they believe in is power. I don't want to talk about who. But I believe that there are some politicians who are, and I want to give you a technical term here. There is a philosopher who recently wrote a short book we have in our library. It's called On Bullshit. Isn't that nice? A philosopher using a nice, wholesome word like bullshit. He draws the distinction between liars and bullshitters. And I'm going to cut to the chase here. Liars at least believe that there's a such thing as the truth. In other words, the truth does matter to them. And they understand what they're doing when they tell a lie. A bullshitter is a person who doesn't really believe in truth or falsity at all. Their game is merely to win people over to their side. They don't really believe in truth. I believe that there are quite a few of our politicians who are in fact bullshitters and sophists in this sense. That they don't really believe in the concept of truth. They really just want to get people won over to their side. And is that a cynical point of view? It's a very cynical view. I happen to believe it's right. Yes, Peters.
Is there such a thing as a situational sophist? For example, can you have a politician who will be a bullshitter on the topic of the debt ceiling, but might be more practical on a practical issue like healthcare?
I think so. I think it's quite possible. Although I think that Plato might say that anyone who has even started to believe that there's not only not truth, but truth wouldn't matter anyway, we're already talking about a problematic person, a truth-challenged person. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think that there are times when a politician might sort of straddle the line between those two, depending on what issue we're talking about. And it's not just politicians. You might know people in your everyday life who are like this. I hope they're not people you call friends, if you follow me. Because indeed, a bullshitter like this probably has no actual friends. Because such a person is probably always trying to figure out ways, well, I erased it, to get things his or her way. And you'll notice a person like that, is kind of, contradictory to the concept of friendship. Because friendship is not about always getting your way. Yeah, it's not always about the self. It's not always about getting your way. Now, I'm almost out of time here. I do want to say a couple of last words. The last wrinkle in this chapter is what the author calls the doctrine of the superior individual. I'll just speak quickly about this. The doctrine of the superior individual is consistent with both cultural relativism and what we call might makes right, or moral realism. What the doctrine of the superior individual says is there actually are people who are superior by nature. People who are superior by nature are not necessarily going to be people who are admired or liked. Because the truly superior individuals, they are individuals. And by individual, we mean a person who is unafraid to walk alone. We mean a person who is unafraid to think for his or herself. We mean a person who is not what the 19th century philosopher Nietzsche would call a banal herd animal. According to the doctrine of the superior individual, most people are wretched herd animals who cannot think for themselves, who lack vision, who lack creativity. Take a guess where the superior individual ends up in society. She's usually an outsider. And this is because mediocre people like them. And this is why a truly superior individual isn't likely to show up in democratic politics. I don't mean Democratic Party, I mean in democracies. This is because most people want to vote for someone who's as, hope no offense taken here, as idiotic as they are. Most people do not want people who speak truths that are uncomfortable. Most people do not like people who are willing to walk their own walk and not be scared that people might be upset with them for doing it. Oh, and by the way, a superior individual also doesn't get into politics for the reason why a lot of people get into it anyway. Many people need to be loved and adored. The superior individual doesn't give a rip about that garbage. So the people who really ought to be in charge in society, according to this doctrine, never are. And this is why society doesn't have the kind of leaders it probably needs. And this is why people who really speak truth to power oftentimes don't end up alive very long. Socrates, hint, hint. Cheers until next time, but can you